Hello, ladies. Welcome to Homemaking Radio. I'm Lydia Ruth, and I hope that you are doing well in your present circumstances. And if you're not, I hope that you are praying a lot about it and making plans for improvement. I feel like I just want to start out with a story this morning, but if you're not dressed and ready for the day and ready for that beautiful place called home, please go and do that. Get yourself ready so that you can be presentable. And I believe that getting dressed in the morning and, fixing yourself up as though you were going somewhere important actually reduces stress or else doesn't contribute to it and can give you a sense of peace and confidence. And so today I want to start out by reading from Wives and Daughters. Now this is Wordsworth editions, and I got it from Thrift Books, but you can get it new in various places on the web, and I like it because they always have such a nice cover, and it's something you could put out on your coffee table and not be ashamed of it. So I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but who said that is trying to get past some things that aren't so nice and get you to look beyond the cover. And I guess I can understand that, but I don't know if that's really a good principle to live by. And we also don't want to be judged by our looks. I know I have several books that talk about that excuse. People shouldn't judge us by our appearance, because God looks on the heart. But a lot of people use that as an excuse, and it's an excuse to keep from being thoughtful of other people by good grooming. And I was reading to you a little bit about that last time. So this is called Roger Hamley's Confession, and it's after what I read to you yesterday, where Mr. Hamley told Roger that he wishes that both of his sons went after real pretty girls that were nice, but none of them ever made any kind of an interest in little Molly Gibson, he called her. And he says, there's a girl after my own heart. And he's encouraging Roger to at least stand up for her, make a statement about it. But Roger says, well, it's too late. I don't think she respects me enough, after the way I behaved with Cynthia and my silly, boyish flirtation with Cynthia. And so his father says, so this was not in the movie Wives and Daughters, and I wish it were, because the father, went to Molly and said, I told him, I wish it had been you. And I can't find the page where she said. I may have read that to you. I may have read it to you last time. So I'm going to read chapter 60, Roger Hamley's Confession. Roger had a great deal to think about as he turned away from looking after the carriage as long as it could be seen. This is when Molly was riding away after she had given him back a rose from the bouquet of flowers he had handed her. The day before, he had believed that Molly had come to view all the symptoms of his growing love for her, symptoms which he thought had been so patent that she felt an attachment which could be soon transferred to another was not worth having, and that she desired to mark all this by her changed treatment of him. She was starting to treat him, they'd almost grown up together, and she was friendly with him, but now had been rather distant from him, and he began to see that it might have been because he had fallen for her stepsister. He puzzled himself hard to find out what could have distressed her at breakfast time. He even went so far as to ask Robinson whether Miss Gibson had received any letters that morning. And according to this, it was a little different in the movie. Molly had overheard someone talking about her and Roger, and it disturbed her greatly in the movie. But in in the book, it looks like she's rather dismayed because Mr. Hamley, the father, had talked to her about it. He even went so far as to ask Robinson, that's the servant, whether Miss Gibson had received any letters that morning. Remember, she was taking care of his mother, who had been ill, and that's why she lived there. And when he heard that she had had one, he tried to believe that the letter was in some way the cause of her sorrow. So far, so good. They were friends again after their unspoken difference. But that was not enough for Roger. He felt every day more and more certain that she, and she alone, could make him happy. He had felt this, and had partly given up all hope, while his father had been urging upon him the very course he most desired to take. No need for trying to love her, he said to himself. That was already done. And yet he was very jealous on her behalf. Was that love worthy of her, which he had once given to Cynthia? Was not this affair too much of a mocking mimicry of the last, again just on the point of leaving England for a considerable time? If he followed her now to her own home, in the very drawing-room where he had once offered to Cynthia, and when they use the word offered, it means that they proposed. Because remember, Hyacinth, the new wife of Mr. Gibson, said Roger Hamley has offered to Cynthia. And then by a strong resolve he determined on his course. They were friends now, and he kissed the rose that was her pledge of friendship. If he went to Africa, he ran some deadly chances. He knew better what they were now than he had done when he went before. Until his return, he would not even attempt to win more of her love than he already had. But once safe home again, no weak fancies as to what might or might not be her answer should prevent his running all chances to gain the woman who was to him the one who excelled them all. His was not the poor vanity that thinks more of the possible mortification of a refusal than the precious jewel of a bride that might be won. Somehow or another, please God to send him back safe. He would put his fate to the touch. Until then he would be patient. He was no longer a boy to rush at the coveted object. He was a man capable of judging and abiding. Molly sent her father, as soon as she could find him, to the Hall. Hamley Hall was the home of the Hamleys, where Roger lived, and then sat down to the old life in her own home drawing-room, where she missed Cynthia's bright presence at every turn. Mrs. Gibson was in rather a querulous mood, which fastened itself upon the injury of Cynthia's letter being addressed to Molly and not to herself. Considering all the trouble I had with her trousseau, I think she should have written to me first. Oh, but she did. Her first letter was to you, Mamma, said Molly, her real thoughts still intent upon the hall, upon the sick child, upon Roger, and his begging for the flower. Yes, just a first letter, 3 pages long, with an account of her crossing, while to you she can write about fashions, and how the bonnets are worn in Paris, and all sorts of interesting things. I don't know if you've ever experienced this with one of your children, that you used to discuss all kinds of things, and then they get a friend, and they're writing letters or talking about the very things that you and they used to discuss. But poor mothers must never expect confidential letters any more. I have found that out. You may see my letter, Mamma, said Molly. There is really nothing in it. And to think of her writing and crossing to you, who don't value it, and my poor heart is yearning after my lost child. Really, life is somewhat hard to bear at times. See, I'm telling you, there is stress in this story. It is revealed, but we get to see what people do throughout a day that seems to alleviate the impact of bad news. Do tell me something about your... There was silence for a while. Do tell me something about your visit, Molly. Is Roger very heartbroken? Does he talk much about Cynthia? No, he does not mention her often. Hardly ever, I think. I never thought he had much feeling for her. If he had, he would not have let her go so easily. I don't see how he could help it. When he came to see her after his return, she was already engaged to Mr. Henderson. He had come down that very day, said Molly, with perhaps more heat than the occasion required. My poor head, said Mrs. Gibson, putting her hands up to her head. Poor head. One may see you've been stopping with people of robust health, and excuse my saying it, Molly, of your friends, of unrefined habits. You've got to talk in so loud a voice. But do remember my head, Molly. So Roger had quite forgotten Cynthia, has he? Oh, what inconstant creatures men are! He'll be falling in love with some grandee next. Mark my words. They are making a pet and a lion of him, and he's just the kind of weak young man to have his head turned again, and to propose to some fine lady of rank. He would no more think of marrying him than marrying her footman. I don't think it's likely, said Molly stoutly. Roger is too sensible for anything of the kind. That's just the fault I always found with him, sensible and cold-hearted. Now, that's a kind of character which may be very valuable, but which revolts me. Give me warmth of heart, even with a little of that extravagance of feeling which misleads the judgment and conducts into romance. Poor Mr. Kirkpatrick, that was just his character. I used to tell him that his love for me was quite romantic. I think I have told you about his walking 5 miles in the rain to get me a muffin one day when I was ill. Yes, said Molly, it was very kind of him. So imprudent, too, just what one of your sensible, cold-hearted, commonplace people would ever have thought of doing, with his cough and all. I hope he didn't suffer for it, replied Molly, anxious at any cost to keep off the subject of the Hamleys, upon which she and her stepmother always disagreed, and on which she found it difficult to keep her temper. Yes, indeed, he did. I don't think he ever got over the cold he caught that day. I wish you had known him, Molly. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had been my real daughter and Cynthia dear papa's and Mr. Kirkpatrick and your own dear mother had all lived. People talk a good deal about natural affinities. It would have been a question for a philosopher. She began to think on the impossibilities she had suggested. I think that's one reason Hyacinth was so agitated all the time. She was always thinking of how life should have been. Her husband should have lived, and Mrs. Gibson should have lived, and they all should have had different places to live. And yes, we can get caught up in that, can't we? So, I wonder how the poor little boy is, said Molly after a pause, speaking of her thought. Remember, Molly's father was a doctor in the country there, and that Roger's brother had a wife, and she had a little boy that had gotten sick. And that was one reason that Molly had to come home, because her father didn't want her to be around the illness. I should have thought that the squire would have desired a better-born heir than the offspring of a servant, with all his ideas about descent and blood and family. His son married a nursery maid from France. You don't know how fond they are all of him. The squire looks upon him as the apple of his eye. I shall teach you more refinement, Molly. That refinement which consists in never even thinking a commonplace thing. Proverbs and idioms are never used by people of education. Apple of his eye, I am really shocked. Well, I believe the Bible speaks of that. Well, Mamma, I'm very sorry, but after all, what I wanted to say as strongly as I could was that the squire loves that little boy as much as his own child, and that Roger... Oh, what a shame to think that Roger... And she stopped suddenly short as if she were choked. I don't wonder at your indignation, my dear, said Mrs. Gibson. It is just what I should have felt at your age. But one learns the baseness of human nature with advancing years. I was wrong, though, to undeceive you so early. Undeceive you. She enlightened her, but depend on it, the thought I alluded to had crossed Roger Hamley's mind. "Let us talk about some more interesting subject," said Mrs. Gibson. Well, see how she changed the subject when she noticed how bogged down they were getting in this discussion of Roger and whether he was refined or not. And so she said, "Let us talk on something more interesting." A friend of mine once wrote down some of these little techniques that people used to use to get out of getting too caught up in a subject that would inflame others. So here's what she changed the subject to. "I asked Cynthia to buy me a silk gown in Paris, and I said I would send her word that the color I had fixed upon. I think dark blue is the most becoming to my complexion. What do you say?" Molly agreed sooner than take the trouble of thinking about the thing at all. Just then they heard Mr. Gibson's step downstairs, but it was some time before he made the entrance into the little room where they were sitting. "How is little Roger?" asked Molly eagerly. "Beginning with scarlet fever, I'm afraid." "It's well you left when you did, Molly. You never had it. We must stop all association with the Hall for a time. If there is one illness I dread, it is this." "But you go and come back to us, Papa." "Yes, but I always take plenty of precautions. However, no need to talk about all the risks that lie in the way of one's duty. It is unnecessary risk that we must avoid." "Will he have it badly?" asked Molly. "I can't tell. I shall do my best for the wee laddie." Whenever Mr. Gibson's feelings were touched, he was apt to recur to the language of his youth. Molly knew now he was much interested in the case. For some time there was imminent danger for the little boy. For some weeks there was a more chronic form of illness to contend with. But when the immediate danger was over and the warm daily interest was past, Molly began to realize from the strict quarantine her father evidently thought was necessary, she was not likely to see Roger again before his departure for Africa. Oh, if she had but made more of the uncared-for days when she had passed with him in the Hall. Worse than uncared-for, days on which she had actually avoided him, refused to converse with him, given him pain by her change of manner. For she had read in his eyes, heard in his voice, that he had been perplexed, and now her imagination dwelt on the exaggeration of the expression of his tones and looks. One evening after dinner her father said, "As the country people say, I've done a stroke of work today. Roger Hamley and I have laid our heads together, and we've made a plan by which Mrs. Osborne and her boy will leave the Hall." "What did I say the other day, Molly?" said Mrs. Gibson. "And go into lodgings at Jennings Farm, not 400 yards from the Parkfield gate." Now, in the movie, they wisely kept Aimee and her little boy there at Roger Hamley's home. Aimee's husband had passed away, and in the movie it just went more smoothly to have her there. And so Mr. Gibson had not told Molly all that had passed between him and Roger. Roger had become a fresh subject of conversation just as Mr. Gibson was hastening away from the Hall after completing the new arrangements for Aimee and her child. "You know that I set off next Tuesday, Mr. Gibson, don't you?" said Roger a little abruptly. "Of course. I hope you'll be as successful in all your scientific objects as you were last time, and have no sorrows awaiting for you when you come back." "Thank you. Yes, I hope so. You don't think there's any danger of infection now, do you?" "Oh, no. If the disease were to spread throughout the household, I think we should have had some signs of it before now." Roger was silent for a minute or two. "Should you be afraid of seeing me at your house?" "Thank you, but I think I'd rather decline the pleasure of your society there at present. It's only 3 weeks or a month since the child began to be sick. Besides, I shall be over here again before you know. I'm always on my guard against symptoms of dropsy. I have known it supervene." "Then I shall not see Molly again," said Roger in a tone with a look of disappointment. Mr. Gibson turned his keen, observant eye upon the young man, and looked at him in a penetrating manner, as if he had been beginning with an unknown illness. Then the doctor and the father compressed his lips and gave vent to a long, intelligent whistle. "Whew," said he. Roger's bronzed cheeks took a deeper shade. "You will take a message to her from me, won't you? A message of farewell?" he pleaded. "No, I won't. I'm not going to be a message carrier between any young man and young woman. I'll tell my womankind I forbade you to come near the house, and that you're sorry to go away without bidding goodbye. That's all I shall say." But do you not disapprove? I see you guess why. Oh, Mr. Gibson, just speak to me one word of what must be in your heart, though you are pretending not to understand why I would give worlds to see Molly again before I go. "My dear boy," said Mr. Gibson, more affected than he liked to show, and laying his hand on Roger's shoulder. Then he pulled himself up and said, gravely enough, "Mind, Molly is not a Cynthia. If she were to care for you, she is not one who could transfer her love to the next comer." "You mean not as steadily as I have done," replied Roger. "I only wish you could know what a different feeling this is to my boyish love for Cynthia. I wasn't thinking of you when I spoke, but, however, as I might have remembered afterwards, you are not a model of constancy. Let us hear what you have to say for yourself." "Not much. I did love Cynthia very much. Her manners and her beauty bewitched me, but her letters, short, hurried letters, sometimes showing that she really hadn't taken the trouble to read mine through. I cannot tell you the pain they gave me. 12 months' solitude in frequent danger of one's life, face to face with death, sometimes ages a man like many years' experience. Still, I longed for the time when I should see her sweet face again and hear her speak. Then the letter at the Cape, and still I hoped. But you know how I found her. When I went to have the interview, which I trusted might end in the renewal of our relations, engaged to a Mr. Henderson, I saw her walking with him in your garden, just as she used to do with me. I can see the pitying look in Molly's eyes as she watched me. I can see it now. And I could beat myself for being such a blind fool as to... What must she think of me? How she must despise me, choosing the false. Come, Cynthia isn't that bad. She's very fascinating. I know. I will never allow anyone to say a word against her. If I called her false, it was because I wanted to express my sense of the difference between her and Molly as strongly as I could. You must allow for a lover's exaggeration. Besides, all I wanted to say was, do you think that Molly, after being and knowing that I loved a person so inferior to her, could ever be brought to listen to me? I really like Mr. Gibson's answer. I don't know. I can't tell. And even if I could, I wouldn't. Only if it's any comfort to you, I may say what my experience has taught me. Women are unreasoning creatures, and are just as likely not to love a man who has been throwing away his affection. Thank you, sir, said Roger. I see you mean to give me encouragement. And I had resolved never to give Molly a hint of what I felt until I returned, and then to try and win her by every means in my power. You see what he's doing? He's making sure he's cleared it with the father first. He's not told Molly how he feels. That's always wise, isn't it? They should always go to the parents and clear it with them first. And people find all kinds of ways around it, but they're happier in the long run if they make sure that it's not being done and sprung on the parents. I determined not to repeat my former scene in former places. However, I might be tempted, and perhaps, after all, she avoided me when she was here last. Now, Roger, I've listened to you long enough, and you've nothing better to do with your time than to talk about my daughter. I have. When you come back, it will be time enough to inquire how far your father would approve such an engagement. Roger answered. He himself urged it upon me the other day, but then I was in despair. I thought it was too late. And what means you are likely of maintaining a wife? I always thought that point had passed too lightly over when you formed your hurried engagement to Cynthia. I'm not mercenary. Molly has some money independently of me, that she, by the way, knows nothing of, and I can allow her something, but all these things must be left till you return. Then you sanction my attachment to her? I don't know what you mean by sanctioning it. I can't help it. I suppose losing one's daughter is necessary evil. Still, seeing the disappointed expression on Roger's face, it is but fair to you to say, I'd rather give my child, my only child, remember, to you than to any man in the world. Now that is high praise indeed. Thank you, said Roger, shaking hands with Mr. Gibson. And may I see her just once before I go? Decidedly not. Therefore I come in as a doctor as well as a father. So I will end there, because after that is the last part of the book. And apparently it was an unfinished book, and the editors finished it, but I always thought that since it was unfinished and it's old enough to be copyright free, that other people could always write different endings to it. So now I'd like to go to a little piece of church bulletin that I found. I was going through old papers and I found this one. It was the questions about making a decision. And if you're a young person at home and you're thinking of doing something, or you want to do something, and you want to know what would be the guidelines or the excuse for doing it. So let's just ask these questions. This is pretty old, because I saw this in bulletins way back in the 1950s. Will it glorify God? And it gives scriptures for each one of these. Will it help or hinder my growth as a Christian? Will it weaken me or strengthen me? Will it uphold? And it's talking about, I assume it's talking about social things and vices and decisions, lifetime decisions and commitments. Will I be doing harm to my body? Will it lead to an unhealthy addiction? Will it draw the lost to Christ or turn them away? Would I want others to follow my example? How will it affect my family? You know, that is one thing that people put on the end of every list, is they don't really care how it will affect their family when they decide they want to do something. And that is one of the most important things, because it will be your family that will pick you up when it all fails. What do my parents say? What are my real motives for doing this? What is the wisest thing to do? And finally, what would Jesus do? I'll try to get a picture of that for the post. And now, one of my favorite books, the Jane Austen Diet. I love it because it's just a lifestyle book. It's not really about a diet. It's about how, well, I guess it's a diet of life. What does she have in her diet? I'll just read what the names of these chapters are, and you can see how he put it together. Very similar to what Greater Health God's Way, where she combined 7 things that you would need for good health, and didn't just focus on food or jogging or exercise. So he has chapter 1, Universal Truths, back to Austen's Body Basics. I should read that one again to you. Our Devouring Plan, a heroine's guide to food. And he has a subtitle, Austen Eats Bread. But of course it showed the difference in this chapter of the bread made at home and the bread that they were forced to eat when they were traveling. And he described this bread of Regency era times, where the commercial bread at the time was just as bad as it is now, and that is that they added a lot of substances to it, including chalk, to make it light and fluffy and white. And so this devouring plan reminds me of a woman I knew that called her dining room the devouring room. The Pemberley Meal Plan. And he has a subtitle, Austen Eats Sugar. But I suppose it wasn't as refined either, because I can remember going somewhere in a foreign country, and we were offered a little piece of sugar cane on the edge of our plate to eat. We actually, suck the liquid out of the sugar cane. Okay, Austen Eats Meat. Walk like an Elizabeth. Exercise in Austen world. Austen Eats Carbs. A Taste for Nature. Austen Eats Garden Stuff. Health and Happiness, the mind-body connection. And that's probably my favorite chapter, because it connects he talked about today's stress is no different than it ever was, and that it all depends on not dwelling on such gloomy thoughts. And I also wanted to, before I read more of that, remember last time I discussed with you, or I told you, not to air your dirty laundry. And of course, if you have a friend, it's okay to call her or text her or talk to her, or if you have a daughter or mother, please pray for me, this happened and that happened. But one of the problems with being out there with your personal life is that people can always use it against you, and they can throw it up in your face in public or remind you of it years later. And I'm sure it's happened to all of us, even childhood blunders. People that would remember, maybe siblings that would remember, that would tease you about it years later. And things, we always tried in our family, when my children were growing up, not to bring up any kind of former error of the other people. It's really not very, what was I going to say? It's not wise to make someone feel desperate. The Bible, the New Testament, has a verse there that talks about if someone has fallen into sin and he has come back, bring them back, but bring them back with gentleness and love, and don't be overbearing with them, because it'll be too much for them to withstand. You need to remember that too. A lot of people are still carrying around the wounds of having done something really bad and repented of it and everything, but because it was told around, they still feel the stress of it. And so that's why it was important not to air your dirty laundry, because once everything straightened out, people would still remember it. And so there was another saying, was called, and I don't know if he covered this in the Mind-Body Connection, was don't wear your heart on your sleeve. That was such an old one. And I think they quit telling that because people, it became quite acceptable to be open about everything. And now that there's social media, they just blurt out what they feel. And if you wore your heart on your sleeve, that meant everybody could see what your feelings were and what your thinking was, and they could attack you for it, and they could also throw you under the bus over it, or they could use it against you in some way, and people will do that. So that means when you wear your heart on your sleeve, it means that you're revealing something that isn't time to be revealed. And remember in the story I was just reading you that Roger was careful not to let Molly know how he felt about her until he had set the foundation for his life and cleared it with her father. His father had made it already quite clear that he approved, but he was trying to clear it with her father so that he wouldn't start something and then have his plans thwarted. So to wear your heart on your sleeve means you appear to be weak or vulnerable in a way, and someone will find something that bothers you and can emotionally abuse you. And this is also the source of stress. And I've been discussing stress, trying to get at the bottom of it for a lot of people. And in this book, Stormy or Meriton talks about how there are some things that contribute to it. And she mentions a poor diet, lack of exercise, and your attitude. And she talks about your environment, and she mentions pollution, noise, heavy traffic, competition, isolation, and transience. That would be moving off, and takes its toll on your body and mind, these sudden, quick adjustments. So she talked about how signs of stress could be maybe not able to sleep, and irritability and headaches and things like that. And then she goes through the book to show a number of things that you might use to correct it all. And even if you never completely rid yourself of stress, at least you would eliminate the things that you were causing yourself. So now I'm going to read this part that he wrote about romance. And I thought that was interesting because Jane Austen wrote about romance, but then he goes on to say and show throughout her books about other sources of love and comfort besides just the man you hope to marry. And this is one of the dangers that comes into when you don't have a proper concept of how to choose someone to marry and how to view them once you are married, as to whether or not they're going to be the source of all your fulfillment. And so he addresses it here, and it says, a fine, stout, healthy love. I'd earn myself a proper Regency tar and feathering if I ignored the most potent mental medicine in Jane's arsenal, the one thing pursued in her books more than any other, what holds Austen's entire universe together and makes us, 3 centuries later, coming back for more. Austen realized that being human automatically binds us in a contract with others. Like the subtle give-and-take motions of a ballroom dance, life makes us enter into a contract of mutual agreeableness with other human beings, and all our agreeableness belongs solely to each other for that time. In biological terms, we need to feel and give love to stay mentally healthy. And I had said this before I even got into the chapter. I had said that people should not give up their families, their parents, all their extended family when they get married, because they're going to need their support. And one of the problems of modern era is that they often get so far away from them that they don't have any of the other love in their lives, and that they find that they can't supply it all for each other, and they need other types of love, especially the bonding with their families. In biological terms, we need to feel and give love to stay mentally healthy. It's hardwired in our hormones. Feeling emotionally connected with others releases the bonding hormone oxytocin, a chemical crucial for lowering stress and daily anxiety, usually responsible for that cloud nine feeling. And you don't need your own Darcy to experience it. You know, with family love, your brothers and your sisters, if it's pleasant, you don't have to work on it, because you're in a family and you automatically love each other if you've been taught that by your family. And so there's not as much stress in it as when you have to go and form relationships with people you work with or in other groups. As far as Jane is concerned, romance isn't always the steadiest source of these healthy love connections. As Eleanor reminds Marianne after being jilted by Willoughby, have you no comforts, no friends? Is your loss such as leaves no opening for consolation? Very true. And this sadness can be triggered any time. And he talks about contact with others improves your health. Admiring a newborn baby, giving a hot meal to someone, or visiting someone. This was vital to someone like Austen, and we saw a lot of scenes of this, of her visiting. Sometimes, I'm talking about Emma particularly, sometimes maybe not so nice, but still, she felt obligated to visit, and it was part of their life. They weren't just talking mainly about romance. And you'd have to read those books again to see all this. And it's interesting to see an author pull out all this evidence. He says, Austen provides many alternatives to experiencing love in her novels. Sister to sister, parent to child, friend to friend. These human contracts are so strong. Even feeling love for faceless strangers is a powerful shield against stress and depression. Have you ever thought about that? When I told you last time that one of the shields against stress is to just appreciate everything, be grateful for everything. You might be going outside for a walk, look at something, but not really see it. But even a blade of grass, can be appreciated. And when you see a fellow human being walking along the way, to pray for them and to appreciate them, it's a great stress reliever. So here he talks about, and I believe that this was written, I need to know the date because of this thing he's going to talk about here, 2019. Okay. And I was not aware of this. I was aware of a kind of a hobby or a pastime that people were enjoying called letterboxing. And you could go on the web and find out where to leave these letters, where people would go and they would add to the little book that was there in a box under a tree or somewhere else, and write their name. And it was called letterboxing. But now he's talking about something I didn't know about, so I'll have to look this up. It says, now a global movement, writing letters to anonymous strangers with actual pen and paper, Regency style, then leaving them in public places for anyone to find. Now, the public places had to be somewhere where it wasn't on private property, where you could put it like under a park bench or in a corner somewhere where it wouldn't be stolen, but only those who knew where it was could find it. Then leaving them in public places for anyone to find has had tremendous impacts on the mental health of thousands. I once found one of these tokens of kindness on a walk a few years ago, just 7 secret words, but it was life-changing. Showing kindness, love, and compassion to others, having tenderness of heart, as Jane would say, works such therapeutic magic because it forces us to turn outward, away from our inward stress and personal pain, and back to what really matters. Whatever her match... See, imagine if you were involved in letterboxing and you opened one of these boxes and there was a note there. You wouldn't be thinking, I wonder where this person works and how much money they make and how much they've advanced in life and how popular they are and whether they're successful or not, or whether they have a nice home or they drive a nice car. You'd be thinking how precious that letter was. Whatever her matchmaking faults, Emma has at least figured that much out. After she and Harriet visit and feed a poor sick family in the village, Emma comes away far happier and with mental priorities properly sorted. These are the sights, Harriet, to do one good. How trifling they make everything else appear. That would be an interesting thought. You might not get the nuances of love right away, as Emma hardly does, but you can't go far wrong with it either. Our brains and bodies are always the better for such timed kindness. Now, if we were to do a de-stress program and you came for an hour, I would take you on a walk down one of the farm roads. We would pick some little tiny apples and we would observe things, and you would come away thinking how trivial everything else seemed, just like he said, just like Emma said. He said, I can't help but find all wonderfully satisfying, like cracking a good riddle with Emma and Harriet. This love, this one thing which has kept the body of Austen's works alive, fresh, and incandescently vibrant as the day she wrote it, can work the same magic within our own bodies today. So we'll take Austen's cue and end with the words she used in one of her last love letters to the world. Everything of love and kindness, proper and improper, now must suffice. Yours very affectionately, Jane Austen. And I'll read more of it later. But if you'll go through the New Testament letters, which is called the epistles, you will see that there's a salutation, and it has a similar effect on you as if someone were to say, "Hello, dear, how are you? I wanted to come sooner and see you, but this letter will have to do." And then the ending is, "Grace and peace be to you." If you would pay attention to those, sometimes we look at that as rather trivial because we're looking for the meatier part of the letters, but those had those greetings and goodbyes were very, very important because they're so healing spiritually to hear good things. And even there is a scripture that talks about how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Now, ladies, I don't have much else for you today, but I'll read one more little piece here in Greater Health God's Way, because I think the homemaker has to, if you wanted to fortify yourself with good health mentally and physically and spiritually for your homemaking, you don't have time to spend the first half of the day with all these things that you would need to do to feel calm and healthy. So what you have to do is integrate it all in your homemaking. And that means if you had been able to observe people of the past, you would notice that they would look out once in a while, and their kitchens were often facing the back garden so they could see their little kitchen garden. But they would go and look out the window every now and then and get their sights at a distance and look out and just appreciate or observe what the day is. It's very good for you. And then they also would sing or talk to their children, and not just talking in ways of just commanding them all the time, but just talking and making observations, because that's how they learn to think too. But you would notice the things that they did that would be personal care and kind of a buffer from getting too worn down so that stress would knock them out. But the women especially liked the smell of fresh baked bread or just cooking, food preparation, and also that is very helpful. Plus, they would go away sometimes just to their mirror to pat their hair down, just to spruce themselves up a little bit, and also stopped for a favorite beverage in their favorite cup, and would maybe step outside for a little bit, go for a little walk, sit down with their reading material, but was all integrated in their homemaking. And it wasn't like what they have in what we call the workplace today, where you spend every moment working until your break time or until your lunch time. You don't have to do that at home. You can integrate it all throughout the day. And I believe in one of the books that I read to you before, this woman that was writing about homemaking said that a woman should learn to relax at home, so that you almost have, and when I was homeschooling my children, we managed this because we felt like we were on a holiday all the time. We had a holiday mentality. We didn't get all tensed up and then have to go on a holiday. We had a holiday mentality. We had quiet time. We integrated goodness and enjoyment and relaxation and even luxury throughout the day. And so like we would say to ourselves, well, when we're finished this particular job, we're going to get our paints out, or we're going to get our cloth out, or we're going to do something, we're going to get our books out, get buried in a story, or we're going to write a letter, or something that gave us a lot of relaxation, maybe just sitting in the sun. So ladies, I hope that this has been helpful to you, and thank you so much for clicking on the link in the description below the channel and going over to the page on which I've embedded this so you can see the other things that I have put there. And I hope that you have a lovely day today. I'm sorry this is not as long as usual, and I have a big day. I have people coming, But while I had a few moments of silence, I wanted to come and talk to you and express a few things. I will just look over my notes a little bit more and see if there's anything else. Oh, yes. Our pastimes and our hobbies and our recreation can also become stressful instead of edifying. Now, remember, edifying means to build up and to improve the mind. But these things that we ladies, unfortunately, will get some interest that will relax us for a while, but then we start to work at it hard or do more of it, and then it becomes stressful. So we have to be very careful about that. And one of the things that I noticed we had given up, see, we've given up a lot, and that's why we suffer so much, I think, from stress, even though we're at home away from apparently the world's stress. Sometimes the home can, you can have stress at home too. And one of the things that we used to have back in the olden days was the stereo record players with the vinyl records. And my grandmother had sent me Beethoven's records. I believe it was just the Fifth and Sixth, the Pastoral Symphony. And as a little girl, I just played it and listened to it, and it was so stabilizing. And then later on, I always made sure I had some kind of a stereo in my home, and I would start out my day listening to this beautiful music, and it reverberated in my mind so well, and it made me calm. And then when they quit making these record players, there was a period of time when you couldn't get them. So if yours had worn out, they couldn't be repaired and you couldn't get one. And then the vinyl records began to either scratch or warp, and so they were all replaced by other things. But our little phones do not have that same feeling because they don't have the vibration in them that our record players did. And I noticed that we had given these things up and not listening to the music that we love. I know not everyone likes classical music, but maybe you like fiddle, or maybe you like something else, and maybe you have given it up because you don't have the same kind of sound as the vinyl records did. And also, you might list some of the things that you used to do that you don't do anymore because things have changed. That maybe when you give up some of these wonderful, relaxing things, you found that it was replaced by a feeling of tension. So, ladies, I hope that this has done you good and that you will have a great day today. Stay close to Christ. I love you. Bye.